I just want to say that it's probably impossible to talk about what we do and about tracking in 45 minutes. So this is going to be a snapshot of what's possible in what we do.
Sure. And we're certainly not the only persons or people that do this. I see, I'm looking around, I see lots of guides, lots of naturalists and lots of trackers and ornithologists. And what we'd like to share with you is a little bit of the diversity of what tracking encompasses for us. So let's start with maybe why trackers track. That might be a good starting point. I'm going to look back at the slides every now and then because I won't remember where I am. I'm not even kidding, I'm dead serious. But so why do we track? I think probably in this environment, the most known reason for being a tracker, I guess, is going to be something like being a tracker in the safari industry. That's quite a well-known sort of aspect or angle. The trackers go out on game drives, they jump out of the vehicle, they track and they find you different animals. That's what trackers do, right? Okay.
Also hunting, as controversial as that may be, whether or not we agree with it, hunting is a reason that keeps the art and science of tracking alive.
So in many different parts of the world, there's a lot of hunting.
Sorry.
Tracking for conservation purposes is also something that we see on a daily basis. People that work out in the different game reserves across the region see tracking on a daily basis. Even louder, I can't, I would have to scream. So I'll do my best. Sorry. Hey! So tracking for conservation is of course a very important thing, and tracking is not only done when we're following rhinoceros, etc. through visual tracking, which is what we're here to chat about, or the art of tracking or science of tracking, but also through various other means. There's a lot of different ways that people can track animals and wildlife.
So, including to recover endangered species. This is a picture of a large antelope in Laos and Vietnam that we've just started a project with to recover. They believe that there are between 0 and 100 of these in the wild left. And we're headed over there with a couple of other trackers to try and train a tracking team and get some individuals of this where we can put them into captivity and then repopulate them in the wild.
The animal is called the saula, as a matter of interest. I'm not sure if any of you recognized it. Yeah, it's incredibly rare. So we're hoping that our tracking team will be able to find some of these in the jungles of Vietnam and Laos.
So science.
Science. That's where the doctor of tracking comes in. All right. So tracking comes from many different perspectives. People look at tracking in many different ways, but I think probably the most prominent or well-known way of looking at tracking would be to look at footprints.
Spoor, tracks.
Lots of words, lots of different names are interchangeable. Footprints, spoor, tracks, all those kind of things that we hear all the time. And we're not too specific about which is which. We're quite happy to call it a spoor or a footprint. That's all good. Yeah, you want this? Another thing that we also look at is the way in which animals move. Okay, so hello. We'll just bounce it around. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Should I just rewind and start again? All right. So one of the other things that we look at frequently is the gaits or the methods in which animals move, how they actually move. Is that working? Yeah. Hello? No? Technical people? Okay.
Gotta be close to my mouth.
Okay.
So, to me, footprints have almost become boring, or at least the identification of them. Because the behavior of an animal interpreting the behavior of an animal. I don't know why this cuts in and out.
Hold it close to your lips.
Okay. The behavior of an animal is much more interesting when you can actually follow the footprints and interpret what an animal is doing. So a big part of what we do is to look at the gait or the track pattern. I'm holding this close to my mouth. So this little drawing here is from one of Lee's books. And the one in the center, if you look at the red track on top of the green track, that is what we consider with most animals to be their baseline gait. And if you look at the green footprint as a front footprint, and then the red one as a hind, then you can see to the right of that medium pace is fast and very fast in a walk. These are lion tracks. And then to the left of that footprint is slow and very slow. And when you can interpret in a trail whether an animal is going at its baseline gait or it's deviating from that gait, it's going faster or slower, that's when you're able to tell what the animal is doing. Is it going fast because it's on a mission to go someplace? Or is it going slow maybe because it's coming around a corner and it's stalking an animal? And you actually can get yourself into the body of that animal as you're tracking the animal. That, to me, is what I find really interesting about tracking.
So, incorporated into tracking, we also include things like the skeletons and bones and horns and teeth and tusks of animals, because identifying these for us is a part of what we do. Also, nice things like this. That's poop. Scat, many different words, but we also look at that. There's actually quite a lot of opportunity on our driveways at home and in different places to see these things around, and it's great to be able to identify it.
Again, behavior. When you can start to look at the tracks and signs that animals leave in the environment, and you see, okay, warthogs were wallowing today. And we saw this today at one of the pans on the reserve that we were working at, where warthogs had come out of the mud and they had dropped fresh mud all along the trail that they were going. You can visualize the animal in your head.
And this is something a little bit new. I know there's a lot of birders here, not like John Dick birders. And we started really looking at the feathers. We want to identify these animals just from individual feathers that we find running around here. And it's our hope, from the people like John and Lindy and the other people who contributed bird carcasses to us, that we'll be able to build a whole book eventually as a feather atlas for all of the bird enthusiasts who actually want to identify their birds piece by piece. And we're not just talking about wings, we even want to use their body feathers and try and figure out what they are. And of course, all these birds are from natural kills, or they've been unfortunately killed by human activity like vehicles or windows. But these are not things that we would go and kill ourselves.
Another thing that we look at is whether or not an animal typically moves by day or by night in the trappers landscape. Because when we go out in the morning and we read the newspaper on the driveway, we can see that the dennet tracks are on top of the rhino tracks. And that gives us a sort of envelope in time, a window in time that we can put those tracks into. And we can decide, is this fresh enough to follow? And then there are diurnal mammals too, that you can also use that alternatively to classify when an animal is new.
Even the insects play a role. So those that haven't been tracking with us, actually what sort of tracks and signs is. But the insects themselves can actually be a lot more accurate and a lot more useful to a tracker to determine the age of the tracker. Just from us knowing what time of the day they move. These precision caterpillars, for example, You wouldn't usually find them walking around too much at night. Donkeys also, not nocturnal.
Unless they're at the thirsty I think you should keep it. It obviously is interesting.
Yeah. I think we can. Yeah. And of course, when it comes to aging tracks, weather events are very important. If you know what's happening with the weather, if you know what's been going on, I always tell my student guides that if you're going to be a tracker, you need to be an amateur meteorologist. We're going to talk more about that a little bit later.
Aging is a whole science unto itself. And when we're looking ahead, when we're tracking an animal, we can see if there are outcrops coming up, and we can anticipate what the soils might look like there. Such as this sandy substrate with a rhino track in it, a beautiful rhino track where you could possibly identify the heel by the cracks in the bottom of the sole of the foot.
Sometimes though, even though you're on a beautiful substrate with the right kind of rocks that are weighted in the right way to produce the right soils, the animals still walk on all kinds of different debris on the ground, leaves, plants, grasses, rocks, stones. So sometimes the tracks don't quite look the way that we might have anticipated. And this, for example, is a rhinoceros track, which to many people might not look like a rhinoceros track, but the track is there. Other types of rock and substrate that we see ahead of us can tell us a different story as we're walking. So we're really looking around us and kind of hoping that the animals are going to choose the right places to travel. So this, for example, is an area of granite. And the granites are actually quite cool because there's different only grow where you have acidic granitic soils.
And this is an indication that your trail is about to go.
Yeah, she said it's about to get really hard. Because when you start moving on to areas like granitic soils, it's no longer fun. But anyway, it's all good. You're looking for little flappy pebbles and what's it? That's the rhino. It's like the other one, doesn't it? Alright. Another thing that helps us a little bit is as we're walking along on a trail and trying to track something and move through the bush as quietly as we can, ahead of us there are often sounds. So tracking is very much a part very much listening to the sounds ahead of you. So as we walk, there will be calls of different types of birds. And as any birder will tell you, birds are very specific about where they're going to live. We haven't yet been able to figure out how to identify the different various types of trees. We're working on it. But if you see something along the lines of this bird, you hear it, you hear its call. This is a white-crowned lapwing. You're about to come upon a large water body. Maybe something like a river system, because I think they primarily spend their time around river systems. A little guy like this, or a little girl, should I say, this is a little female, a mocking clipchat. These little birds would be typically found in areas where we're going to encounter rocky outcrops or buildings. We actually have one that lives right where we're busy training at the moment, and she has occupied the garage. It's really good for singing because she can hear herself resonating. Another little species with a very specific preference. This is a young ground lapwing. These birds are going to find typically in an open area. So do you get what I'm saying here? As we walk and we listen and we hear the sounds ahead of us, it's going to give us an indication of the types of habitats we're about to move through. And we call that reading the landscape. What about that bird? What can I expect ahead of me? Yeah, definitely. Riverine forest in this low-health area. Maybe even something a little bit more jungle-like if you go towards the mountains.
So these are very interesting things for us as trackers to get a sense of what the animals might be doing ahead of us and where they might have gone.
As well as the alarm calls and the vocalizations of those birds. You might be getting the impression that tracking is more than about tracks. Also about hearing things, smelling things, there's a carcass up ahead. Using all of your senses instead of just your eyes to anticipate what's coming, allow you to move with momentum on your trail.
So when we look at footprints, you don't always immediately see one habitat colony. So when we look at footprints, people don't always necessarily see what they're looking at, and the details of a specific track can be quite important. So in this instance, I'm not sure how many of you see 4 toes of an animal going that way. Well, that's a relief. I'm very glad. This is an antelope coming in the direction of us from the screen. And what's happened is it stepped into thick mud or deep mud, and its hoof has opened up, and its hind foot has been put on top of that. So it looks kind of weird. When you see a track like that, people might go, what am I even looking at? And even more into the detail aspect, we can look at individual beings, individual animals, who have very specific features, like this big male lion. You see on his second toe from the top, there are 2 creases. Now, if you're in the right substrates, definitely not that granite that we were talking about a little bit earlier, you could probably identify this individual just by those markings. So we do this a lot with animals like rhinoceros. When I start a trail on rhinoceros, I immediately take note of the cracks and creases and structures at the bottom of the feet.
Individual animals are a lot more identifiable than I think. Usually we identify them through our local knowledge, because we know that this leopard occupies this territory, and we get to know his tracks, and we get to know the tracks of the females that overlap with him by the cubs that they have, and individual characteristics of those animals that belong on that landscape. If you're part of that landscape long enough, you know the individuals that move there. This was a leopard that we tracked in the Congo, and his left front foot. So he had a broken toe. You can see that as the toe closest to the ruler, and it caused his track to be very, very recognizable. So a lot of times, even with the local knowledge of who lives there, you can identify individuals by little quirky characteristics in their tracks.
Another aspect that we use when we track and when we're out there with animals, and I know there's 1 or 2 people in the room that are really body language specialists when it comes to wildlife. The way that animals stand, what they do, how they look. For example, in this instance, these animals are telling us a story. Now, as trackers and guides, when we're driving along and we see this, 4 or 5 animals all cued in on the same position. They're looking straight ahead, their ears are cupped, they're ready, they're watching something. This tells us that there's a predator in the area. By contrast, when we see the body language of an animal like this, who's running along with his tail fluffed out, he's dripping saliva, he's in a kind of a bouncing gait, he's got his head angled forward. This guy's not fleeing a predator. He's trying to be the impressive, dominant male impala that is going to round up all the ladies. In other instances, it's not even the body language so much as what they have been doing. And if you look on the body of an impala once it's been grooming, they'll actually have these little wet markings which angle up towards the shoulder because they groom themselves with their lower incisors, so their lower teeth. So if an animal's been grooming itself and the herd's looking quite relaxed, then you know you've probably found a bunch of impalas that are not being bothered by anything. They're in a quite relaxed mood. So for us as guides and trackers, that means we stop and talk about those impalas for a little while, and we know we're not going to encounter a predator right there at that particular point. So when we track, when we follow the footprints of the animals on the ground, if we look at the tracks and we read what we're seeing, remember a little earlier Kersey spoke about understepping when the animal slows down or overstepping when the animal speeds up. Well, when we see tracks of predators and other animals on the ground, we might then be able to anticipate some of the behaviors that are about to unfold. So, for example, this is a picture I took this morning with the students. As you can see, we prepared for a really long time, and I was just looking for the right picture. And this leopard that we were following, the track on the left-hand side that says F is the front track, and the one that says H is the hind track. So this shows us that this animal was moving with a little bit of pace. Now with a leopard, this is a normal walking pace. Leopards are just going shopping. They walk fast. But when you see a leopard in this body position, you're going to find a whole different sequence of tracks. You're going to find the hind feet sit way behind the front feet in what we call an understep.
And when you see a bend in the road, if you're following lions, they're just going to go straight through it. They don't move to the outside like if you're following a leopard. The leopard is a smaller animal. It moves to the outside because there could be something around that bend that it either wants to hunt or it wants to avoid, like a pride of lions. Lions just walk straight through a landscape. They don't care.
This, of course, these are things we've observed. It's not a rule, but it's certainly something we see. We often find the lions will even cross onto the inside track just so they have to walk like half a meter less. The way that this leopard is standing at the moment, she's put both of her feet together. So this is similar to what we would call a box stop, where the animal is stopped in kind of a square-footed pattern. When we watch these animals doing this kind of thing, they'll often turn their head from side to side. So we can, after following a trail, we can get a sense of whether the animal was looking left or looking right, which comes into play a little bit later in the chat when we start to talk about when they're hunting. So if the animal looks left, usually its left front foot will angle towards the left. And if it's looking to the right, its right front foot might angle to the right. So you might wonder why that's important, but we can often anticipate the next few behaviors if we look at that kind of thing, and if we also have an intimate knowledge of the weather. Another thing to do with the weather is, of course, what are the animals going to do on any given day? For example, hyenas. Those of you that have been out in the field here in the summer months, you know that in the middle of the daytime sometimes we find hyenas splashing around in the water, trying to get as wet as possible, trying to cool down. And it's kind of an atypical behavior for an animal that is supposed to be nocturnal.
Where do lions go in the middle of the day? Sleep in the shade, right? But if it's raining, they might seek cover. So your weather patterns that you're experiencing will help you to anticipate where to go.
So the last bit was that your weather patterns will help you to anticipate where the animals are going to go. And when you start to combine that with the calls of different bird species, if you're hearing crowned lapwings ahead of you and it's a hot day and the lions are still moving, they're obviously not going to be going into that clearing. So these are things that you can sort of use to try and anticipate the behaviors and the activities of the animals. Knowing the wind is very important as well. When we're out on a trail, we are continuously checking the wind direction. We feel it on our bodies if it's a hot day, the back of our neck, on our cheeks, not me, and you feel it on your perspiration. But in some instances, you actually need to reach out there and try and find something to help you to determine the wind direction, like the spread hairdrop, for example. Another thing that we use to determine the wind direction is we watch ahead for birds like magpie shrikes or long-tailed paradise riders, or in some habitats maybe widow birds, hornbills. They're all typically perched with their beak into the wind. So if you can see the birds ahead of you and how they're sitting on average, that's usually quite a helpful thing as well.
On a more local level, you can look for things like squirrels that are up in the tops of trees eating the seeds and the fruits of the different trees, because they drop them and the wind catches them, so they all land to one side of the tree. So if you're trailing an animal through there, you can look on the different sides of the tree to where the seeds are falling, and then which direction the wind was in, and that can help you both to get closer to your animal and potentially to even indicate what direction they were going, because a lot of animals will move into the wind.
Even the night before you go tracking, you sit down there and you sit around the campfire, and I always seem to remember which way the smoke was blowing, because we all had to move around the fire to leave a little gap there. So that gives you a general idea of the nocturnal wind trends in an area. Of course, it becomes much more specific than that. Yeah, it becomes much more specific than that. So, like for example, in any kind of river system, this is the lowest place on the landscape. So, when the wind blows in a river system at night, almost invariably the wind is going to be going downhill. It's going to be flowing in the direction that water would flow. So that may or may not be a river with water in it, or it might be a dry riverbed, or even a drainage line. But if you stop in, next time you cross a drainage line, just switch off your car, open the windows, and feel. And if it's at night time, the wind will probably be flowing downhill. So that helps us to figure out whether something like a leopard was walking into the wind, maybe hunting, or if it was walking with the wind at night, then maybe it wasn't. So we're starting to anticipate some of those behaviors.
Pretty much all animals, their body shape will tell you something about the job that they do or where they live. So the webbing on the outer toe of this water thickney will tell you that it lives near water. It has a little bit of webbing up towards the toes. And the more in the water that many of these animals live, the more webbing will occur on that foot.
So a question that I've always asked myself is, why on the outside? Why not on the inside? So if you think about it, birds don't have 4 legs that they can walk on, right? They do have wings. Okay, sorry to the ornithologists in the group, but they have to basically put their feet right underneath their body to walk. So the webbing is where the weight will be situated on the foot, and that stops them from sinking into the mud. So if you think of each foot stepping into the mud, that will catch them and stop them from sinking too deep.
And this jackal depositing its scat on top of this little tiny piece of shrub. That's classic behavior for jackals. They have classic one-upmanship. They will put their scat on top of other scats. They will put their scats on top of rocks, little shrubs, trees, grasses. It's amazing some of the things that we've seen jackal scats perched on. And they do this because they're advertising. This is my space. And they want to advertise to all the other jackals that might come through. So not only is it an olfactory or a smell thing, but it's also a visual thing because it's up higher so that other animals can see it. They're marking their territories.
And this is a feature that we see all over the world with canids. So if you were tracking a fox in North America, you would probably see the same behavior where they defecate on top of things to raise it up, just to try and impress the other animals of their species. Another aspect of the form of the animal following its function, if you just think of a creature like a chameleon, that camouflage of the animal is absolutely vital to its existence. So it's not something we can track, but it's something that we don't see in the bush. Other little creatures will actually go out of their way to camouflage themselves in the strangest little ways. This is the larval stage, or the larval stage of a tortoise beetle. A super cute little creature. But this one is just hatched. If you look at the back end of the animal, which is to your left, you'll see there's some debris beginning to accumulate there. And what this animal does is every time it goes to the toilet, it lays that big tail down flat and picks up the dung. Well, eventually, the entire animal will be covered in an umbrella of dung. And that's what it hides under. So its form follows its function. How it looks follows what it needs to do to survive. Then you end up with this really funny looking dropping on top of the leaf. And we see these quite regularly if we look around. It just looks like a bird dropping or something like that.
And you see the leopard. I think I need to say anything about this now.
I think once again, the form of the animal follows its function. So this is just a little point on curiosity and some of the things that we've asked as questions when we've been out there in the field. And these questions sometimes lead to quite unique or new discoveries, which is pretty cool. Some of them are quite everyday things that we all see. So for example, the zebra millipede. As soon as the rain starts, we start seeing these animals climbing up trees and doing all kinds of peculiar things that we wouldn't usually expect them to do because they spend most of their time feeding on the ground. But that's probably just associated with some kind of a change in the pressure in the air. And these little animals know that if they get up off the ground, they have less chance of drowning. So that's a nice warning for us. When all the millipedes are migrating away from the Olifants River in columns, we know we need to just be careful.
As teachers of tracking, we always tell our students that we can't teach you every single track and sign that there is in nature. Nature is so big that we can't know it all, and that's a beautiful thing. And so the first thing that we try to do is role model curiosity and the ability to observe and question what you're observing. And these questions have led us to some beautiful discoveries. This track of a crested barbet. Most bird tracks are 3 toes forward, 1 toe back. You can see there are 2 toes forward and 2 toes back in this bird. We call that a zygodactyl structure. There'll be a test later. The really amazing thing about most birds, if you think of that 3 toes forward, is that that's the widest part of a bird track, right? The 1 toe going back is narrower. But with the crested barbet, it's almost like they have their feet on backwards. And it took us years of watching these birds move around on the ground to figure out that they have their feet on backwards.
We would walk up where the crested barbet had been hopping around on the ground. So, well, I can see these beautiful little hornbill tracks going the other way, but I wonder, maybe it's too light to leave a track? Anyway, so that caught us for a long time. But it was a fun discovery when we actually really figured it out because somebody gave us a dead crested barbet and we got to play with its feet. Words you never thought you would hear. Anyway. What about the impala? I mean, we all see impalas every day, so we must know everything about impalas, but actually it's really quite interesting. I don't know if you notice in this image, while the impala is walking and trying to shake off those pesky little birds, sorry John, the left feet are moving together and he's standing on his 2 right feet. So when an impala walks, he kind of goes like this. It's pretty weird. But we saw this and thought, okay, that's cool, giraffes can do it, so that's not too bad. But then we went and looked at the tracks. And for some reason, somehow, the impala seemed to get his hind foot in front of his front foot every time. We were trying to figure out how did he do that? It was kind of weird. Anyway, so we sat and we watched and we watched, and eventually we figured it out. So he doesn't get his hind foot in front of his front foot. What he does when he walks is he puts down his left feet, and he puts down his right feet. Then he does both of his left feet, and both of his right feet, then both of his left feet. So actually the groups of tracks they're interlinked, and it confused us completely. So that's actually a group of tracks. And that is two, and this, and that. Yeah, a front and a hind each time. And we were really misinterpreting it. We were looking at it as that being a group of tracks. And then this one, and then that one. And trying to figure out how the animal got his legs around. Maybe this was obvious to everyone else, but I was looking at this for ages and trying to just figure out how it was moving. So, anyway, so these are fun discoveries that we've made over the years. This last one's a little bit strange.
He was crawling around in the mud for years, looking at these little things and digging them out. And finally, he found a little larval creature in the mud, was able to look it up, figure out what it was, just because of the curiosity, the initial curiosity, the observation, the research. And this is a hippo fly. And we see them in the mud all the time. We see this circular shape with a little hole in the center of it.
So a lot of the time when we're out there tracking, we see these things, and this one I saw close to 10 years before I knew what it was. That was pretty fun. In fact, one of the people in this room helped me to identify what the fly was. So yeah, so pretty cool stuff. But you spend a lot of time focusing on different kinds of signs, focusing on different kinds of signs and structures in the wild, and we've actually got reams of photographs, folder after folder of things we don't know what they are yet, but we still have to work on it and try and figure these things out. So that curiosity has to be one of our main driving forces.
Just wanted to add that the ability to ask that question, to just put it in your mind, is enough that when you start seeing it again and again, and eventually you see that creature doing it, that the light bulb goes off in your head. It's the aha moment. Because you might have 10 years ago stored that in your mind and you're noticing it. It's kind of like the new car syndrome. When you get a new car, you start noticing the new car everywhere, right? You may have never seen it on the road before you bought one, but as soon as you buy one, every other car is that car, right? So just the act of putting that question in your mind helps you to eventually find the answer. And sometimes it takes 10 years, sometimes it only takes 10 minutes. Sometimes you don't ever find an answer, but the more we ask ourselves these questions, obviously the more we learn.
So these guys are leaving a bit of a trail. Looks pretty suspicious to me, but the reason we put this slide in here is because this all started somewhere, and obviously we can never know where, because tracking is as old as all of us, all of our nations, all of our histories combined. In fact, before we even recorded our history, people were tracking in different ways. Maybe it was just someone looking up at a vulture descending towards a carcass and recognizing the sign that that bird is going down for something to eat. And as he or she approached that carcass, they saw the track of the lion and knew what kind of an animal they were going to contend with. So we like to think that this curiosity is a very old curiosity, and it's something that we all possess. It doesn't matter what our ethnicities are, it doesn't matter where we come from in the world. We all come from communities that track. We want to just put that in as a little reminder for you. That's what we've got, so if there are any questions about anything, please feel free to ask. And I think we came in under the belt. 3 minutes. Lovely.